Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And joining me today are Hayley Andrews, co-founder of Your Freedom Empire. Welcome, Hayley.
Thank you for having me.
Did you have a good trip down?
It was okay.
I think you're fibbing.
I think I am fibbing.
Okay, and joining Hayley is Paul Doran Jones, Director of Town and Country Property Auctions. Welcome to you, Paul.
Hi, great to see you.
Your second show, so we've obviously not upset you too much.
No, it's been great so far.
That's good. Okay. Well,
It's your first show with me though.
Exactly, first with you, but all in good time.
Oh dear, I forgot to tell you about this. Okay, Hayley, your first question. Do the panel think that the recent rise in rental rates will encourage house purchase and reverse the trend of the younger generation renting?
I think those that want to rent will rent for the flexibility, and those that want to buy will buy. I think while rental is increasing, and we're at, I think it's 4.3% this year. Sorry, 3.4%. Yeah, 3.4.
One of the two.
One of the two. Yeah, definitely 3 point something.
3.2. We could take the average.
It is 3.2% this year. But everything else is going up as well. So I don't think that the rental increasing will make people question whether they buy or whether they rent. I think what most people actually look at is not just affordability, they look at flexibility as well. And if you look at rental inflation, and then house price inflation and inflation overall and the cost of fuel, gas, water, electricity, food, everything is going up. So it's just a natural progression. I don't think that the rental increasing will actually stop people thinking about renting and thinking about buying. I think those that want to buy will buy, and those that want to rent and have that flexibility will rent.
I think you're right, and I think in a lot of cases, I wish we would get out of this thought process that says you've got to buy a house, you've got to do it while you're young. I'm not so sure it's such a wonderful thing. They've never had that ethos in Europe, have they?
Such a huge cultural mindset here in the UK, isn't it, that we have to own our bricks and mortar?
I don't think it is anymore.
Do you think it's shifted away from that?
I think that the younger generation now look at, they want to experience life now. They want to spend the money now, have the memories, and they put more emphasis on that than holding bricks and mortar in a long-term plan. So they think less for the future, but also with their career, they tend to be moving around a lot. So they're restricting themselves by owning a property and being tied to one area and their opportunities to whatever's available for them there. So I just think that it's a lifestyle choice. And I think what happens is most people put the emphasis on affordability. And actually, if you speak to people that are renting, quite often it doesn't come down to affordability. It comes down to flexibility, better areas, better locations, nicer properties for the same amount of money. So can you buy a property and your mortgage will cost the same as a rental property? Yeah. So some people will say, well, okay, it's cheaper or makes more sense for me to buy. But if they're not planning on staying there for the next 5 to 10 years, then of which employment, nobody stays in jobs that long anymore, do they?
But that's the whole point. The whole commercial ethos has changed, hasn't it? I mean, when I was a kid, there was firms around that would be around for your lifetime.
Yeah, and you'd work there for your life.
If you were lucky enough to have a job there.
Exactly.
I can remember when I was 16, I left school and I had one job and I changed it. My dad says, well, why have you changed your job? You had a job. What are you doing? Yeah. And I worked for quite a nice company, but it wasn't what I wanted, so I moved. And that's just become more and more prevalent as time goes on, hasn't it?
And I think people focus more on experience now, and they'll, once they've learnt what they feel they can from that particular role, they want to progress, they want to push themselves. We're more ambitious, and it's not about settling and staying in one place. It's more about freedom to move around and have choice.
Also, the internet's had a bearing on this because now, these days, you can see everything you want to see outside of your little bubble you know, when I was a kid, you know, you had your own little focus in life, and that's what you were stuck with.
That's all
really.
that kind of existed, yeah.
The world's become a much smaller place.
It
I
has,
agree with
yeah.
Hayley. It's you know, people are travelling around. We're able to work remotely.
Yeah.
You know, the way people work now is very different. So they don't need to be so centric in the centres potentially. So it's an interesting one. I think that fluidity and liquidity is.
But you know, one or two of the companies. I mean, one of the big credit card companies. They have a policy of never buying property in terms of offices or premises or whatever, and they say it's because we want total flexibility. If we're in an area and the work demographic changes and it doesn't suit us, then we just move, because we can do it. We can say we're off, you know, at the end of the year, and that's how it is. And I think people are applying that to their own lives now.
Absolutely. So I just think it's a change in kind of attitude towards home ownership, and it's not down to all of the kind of headlines that are kind of bandied out there. But also, you know, with the cost of living rising, inflation and house prices, obviously, you know, okay, they've slowed down the last couple of months and arguably even this year, but it's still hit double digits. You know, May, we were in over 12%.
Yeah,
so you look at the comparison as well, they're not actually getting a cheaper deal.
No.
So, no, I think you know, if they haven't already saved the deposit money up, how are they going to do that anyway?
Yeah, where will it come from?
Yeah, so...
Right, well, on that all-encompassing note, we'll move on to your question, Paul. I fully understand that when buying a property at auction, I will be provided with a buyer's information pack, and I will be expected to do my own due diligence on the property. However, after having made my bid and had it accepted, and in the following weeks find that some of the information pack was either wrong or at best misleading, do I have any rights of refund or cancellation of the deal? And I'm presuming refund, that would be because you put down a sort of non-refundable 10% deposit, yeah?
I assume so, yes. In short, no, you don't have recourse. The auction process is really driven by, it is a buyer's beware process. The legal pack that's produced prior to auction is there to be seen, to be reviewed. You know, we strongly advise that you get third-party, you know, independent legal advice on it. But when you exchange contracts, you pay a 10% non-refundable deposit, and that contract is exchanged. It's legally binding. So to then come back through the process and say, we weren't aware of this, or there was an unknown here, they're the questions that you need to raise or get your solicitor to raise prior through inquiries. And you take a view on those. If you don't receive, you know, those inquiries, or they're not answered to the sufficient level, you shouldn't really be proceeding with that transaction. I'm amazed that.
Well, you're proceeding at risk, aren't you?
You're proceeding at risk. Yeah, you take a view on it. I'm amazed at how many prospective buyers come through and haven't, you know, downloaded the legal pack, haven't looked at the special conditions. You know, they're open to, you know, conversations like this, and it can be a potential minefield.
Yeah, just out of interest, if you do fail on your contract with at an auction, you purchased a property, you put your 10% down, you don't complete. Who actually chases you? Is it the auction house, or is it the solicitor
typically, but because
which solicitor?
The seller's solicitor,
okay, will
chase you with a notice to complete. Typically, would be their first port of call, which would give you 10 working days to complete on that transaction. But
they charge you interest.
They charge you interest. They charge you solicitors' fees. All of that will be part of your contract, your contract that you've entered into. But furthermore, that the deposit, the 10% deposit, has already been paid. So you would in theory forfeit that if you did not complete after that notice to complete. And you are also open to lack of performance, being sued for lack of performance, for failing to fulfill that contract. So it's a very, very dicey, you know, place to be. It's something we don't see too often. I think it really sharpens the mind when you've got a 10% non-refundable deposit. Sure. Solicitors are extremely proactive. They know that they've got a time frame. It's like the sword of Damocles hanging over their head. They've got to get it done, and they typically do. They're very good, very effective and efficient.
Well, in a straightforward house conveyance, let's say you're dealing with a property developer and you put your 10% down, you've exchanged, but you don't complete, then the process would be that the developer takes you to court. That's after giving notice to complete. And usually what would happen is the developer then resells that property and you would be responsible for the shortfall.
Yes.
In between the two. Is that the same principle for an
That's
auction
exactly the
house?
same principle. It's typically the loss sustained, and that is normally covered by that 10% deposit.
Right.
But I'd steer it away from that. I think the process by demanding a 10% non-refundable deposit gives you motivated buyers. They know that they can complete, and they go into these transactions eyes open. They've seen the legal pack, hopefully reviewed them, hopefully taken third-party advice, and they know what they're buying, they know what they're getting, they know when they've got to complete, and that actually gives a level of certainty to the transaction where everybody actually has a level of pragmatism. Sellers can then work with a buyer, and they have maybe a little bit more flexibility because things do crop up in any transaction. And if you're holding somebody's money, you know that they're trying to perform. And I think there's an element of that kind of pragmatism is taken across those transactions.
Okay, well, I think actually that 10% is the best form of buyer qualification you could have, just about, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Just really good. Okay, well, on that note, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back after the break asking Hayley and Paul more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and join me is Hayley Andrews and Paul Doran Jones. Welcome back. So Hayley, your second question. Do the experts think that the progression of the HMO model to that of high-grade co-living premises will become the norm, or will the investment and running costs outweigh the attraction of trendy, luxurious living spaces?
So HMOs and co-living are different, but they're still very much the same as well. So HMOs have come a long way the last 10, 15 years. It's not just a room with a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom anymore. So a lot of the HMOs now, especially what I see in the audience that I target, are high-end. Their rooms are bigger, they're self-contained as such, with communal space as well. With co-living, what you actually see is it's more of a community, I guess, and that's really what the developers are going down. Nice big open plan kind of kitchen, diner, Taco Tuesday to encourage kind of community within the household, pool rooms, cinema rooms, and all things like that. So I see the attraction, but I think it very much comes down to the audience and also their budget. So just take Canary Wharf, for example. For a co-living space in Canary Wharf, you'd be paying about £430 a week, per week. If you look at that in comparison to HMOs, you'd be paying around £230. So it's always going to come down to affordability. It's going to come down to, obviously the cost to buy the property, to produce that kind of standard as well, much higher quality, and in my opinion, targeting a higher end audience, the end user. But while the rental is obviously more also, the cost to actually produce that is much higher as well, and the cost to run it is also much higher. So it's going to come down to what does the area need? Is there an audience for it? And then that in comparison to purchase, delivery, and rental income.
Sounds like it's two different markets, really.
It can be very much the same. As I said, HMOs have come a long way. We're not talking about kind of, a tiny room with a shared kitchen and bathroom anymore. That's not the model of HMOs. Many HMOs now and professional landlords are producing really high-end, kind of like boutique hotel style accommodation with communal space as well. What they don't have in HMOs is the additional facilities such as the cinema rooms and things like that. And they don't, in most cases, and I'm not going to say all because some HMO landlords would do this, they don't have that kind of itinerary that would, everybody's doing Family Friday or movie night or pizza night. And there's kind of like that encouragement of interaction within the housemates with a co-living development.
I was going to ask you, although they're different in terms of presentation, factually, they're very similar. In other words,
they're valued the same.
Yeah,
they'll be valued the same.
But actually, it's a multi-person occupation. would it require for co-living the same kind of licences that an HMO would require?
It would, yes.
Because I see a lot of them are advertising, rather than saying HMO co-living, come and rent a space from us, they say come and join our residential club.
Yeah,
So
and some of them are self-contained, and under building regs, they've been done to those regs, so they're classed as self-contained units, separation, and all things like that. But some of them are HMOs. They're just larger HMOs with communal space, and they still need to go down the same route. The definition of a HMO is, of course, multiple individuals living together, sharing basic facilities, and it's their primary place of residence. So it ticks all of those boxes. So some of them will fall under licensing, and you'll have to do, obviously, the same modifications, fire doors, all things like that, fire safety, HHSRS. And then some of them will actually be self-contained units with just the use of communal areas as well. So I guess it would depend on how it was set up, whether it would be licensable or not, and whether it would be classed as a HMO or self-contained units. With
I know in an HMO you use a sort of modified assured short-hold tenancy, wouldn't you?
Well, it's an AST, it's still an AST. It's a room-only AST, so they have rights over their room or their space, and then the right to use the communal space as well.
And would that be the same for co-living?
I guess it would be if it depends on the setup. So if it's set up as a HMO with the additional space, then yes. If it is, I would think it would be, yeah. I would say it would be an AST. They're still given right within their AST to use the communal space. So yeah, I would have thought
I was just wondering with co-living, I mean, part of the sales pitch that you see in some of them is perhaps, if you take Canary Wharf as an example, you work here in the financial centre in the week and you go home to you whatever at the weekend, then an AST wouldn't be suitable, would it? Because it wouldn't be your main residence.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Is it your main residence or not? Have you got people that are calling that home? And that's what it would come down to. So it's kind of does it fall under serviced accommodation, or does it fall under a HMO or a self-contained unit?
I suppose, like a lot of new ideas, it'll fall into place in time.
It will fall into place. I think there's a market there for it, and some of them, and especially locally here, are absolutely beautiful. I'd be quite happy to live there. And I see the attraction as well, and why people are moving towards that way of living, because it is more of a community. And if you are moving into the country or moving to a different area, you may want that ready-made kind of network and people that you can relate to, live with, and spend time with. So yeah,
all right. Thank you for that, Hayley.
You're welcome.
Paul, your question. I'm looking to increase my portfolio of buy-to-let properties and thought I might try going north of the border and invest in Scotland, as I read investment there is getting better and better. I'm intending to buy at auction and wondering if the same completion conditions and general auction procedures are the same as in England.
It's a good question. The procedures around conveyancing and auction are extremely different in Scotland. We do have a dedicated team there who would be happy to kind of assist with any of those inquiries, but you would need to go and seek specialist help in those areas, specifically Scotland, to lead you through the nuances and the differences.
Well, the conveyancing laws.
From the conveyancing perspective and just from a process perspective, I think, before you did that, maybe you might look at some of the other areas, the high yielding or high performing areas that we talked about higher up in the programme, that might give you the same yields in areas in the country, the northeast, the northwest, the Liverpool, Manchester. So you might not need to go for a complete change in process. But we wouldn't want to advise you on the auction process north of the border. We'd want to put you into a specialist.
Okay, but I suppose again this question comes up a lot for us on the programme, is should you invest fairly close to home so that you can manage well? I mean, I know we have internet communication now, and communication is a lot better than it was, and there's a lot more specialists around than there were. But there is this sort of comfort about being sort of fairly local, isn't there?
There is, and if you're looking at building a portfolio and it works in the area where you live, great, fantastic. But the kind of hiccup is that majority of us live in areas that are perhaps more affluent than the areas that we would invest. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. It's a different audience and it's a different drive in that area. So I think as long as you've got good, solid people on the ground that you trust, and it doesn't matter. You go where the numbers work, basically, in my opinion, and where there's demand. And as long as you have those two things, with your good, solid team on the ground to be able to implement and exercise whatever strategy you want to do, as long as there's lending as well, obviously, and all things like that, and you've got multiple exits, then I don't see why anyone in this day and age should have to stay to kind of just within their area.
Well, I think you've actually hit the nail on the head, which again is something that keeps coming up on our programs, which is build a team. Build a good team.
And understand the process. I think not just the difference in conveyancing, which was the question, but along the whole journey, it's understanding, debunking the myths and really getting into the nuts and bolts of what's required.
Well, it's with Scotland, a different legal system. It's different tenancy law. Scotland don't have exchange contracts. They have missives. You don't pay 10% down on missives. You pay 100% on completion. It's a different kind of process. It's much quicker. And actually, their buying process is actually very ethical. There's no gazumping or anything like that. It's done between the solicitors.
It's quite aligned.
As long as you understand, and you have, obviously, you do need a Scottish solicitor because they have to do an extra year to qualify. So English solicitor wouldn't be able to do the conveyancing in Wales, whereas Scotland, a Scottish solicitor can do the conveyancing in England and Wales. As long as you've got the teams on the ground, it doesn't matter. You've got the whole of the UK and even arguably world. As long as the numbers stack up, then why not?
You're brave.
I'm not brave. I actually deal with internationals, and of course, if internationals are investing from abroad, how do they go and view a property of a weekend? So we had to come up with systems that allowed them to invest safely without people taking advantage of them. So that is what we did. We recognised that the reason our portfolio works so well was because of the teams we have on the ground. It's one thing to have the numbers, the demand, and everything stacks up on paper, but to actually implement and exercise that is a completely different thing. So as long as you've got competent people that are working with you to build your business, then I don't see any reason why you can't invest anywhere within the UK.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Yeah,
so Hayley Andrews, co-founder of Your Freedom Empire, thank you very much for coming in today and answering the questions. Paul Doran Jones, Director of Town and Country Property Auctions, thank you too for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great to have you both on the show. I'm Stephen Galpin. I look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.